Okay, so anyhow, so what is a Tatin? Well, that one's a apple Tatin, vegetarian for Mark, or vegan for Mark, sorry, yes. And this is the logo for Tatin, which is a package manager that for tastefully packaged APL code. So let's do a quick survey. First of all, how many people have used a Tatin package? Okay, maybe a fifth of the people. Okay, how many people have written a Tatin package? Have you published it? Oh, okay. How many people have written and published a Tatin package? Okay, that's better. Yeah, there should be about 3 of us. Okay. And then finally, how many people have some code that might make a good Tatin package? Well, that's hopefully a bunch of, yeah, at least half of us, well, 2/3 almost. You've developed utility libraries for the past 40 years, right? Some of them are useful, yes? Okay. So if you have a useful utility library, that might make a good Tatin package. So if you go out to tatin.dev, that's where the Tatin registry lives, and you can get some information about all the packages that are out there. Right now, the APL team has written 44 packages. That's Kai and associates. Devon Church has 4, and last year we had 2 from Dyalog, and Morton threatened to retire if we didn't have at least 2 more in 2024. Well, we exceeded that and added 3, and we're still not through the end of the year. So, first of all, I want to say thank you, Kai, for sharing quality utility libraries for decades. When I first started using Dyalog, I went out to the APL team website, and because I needed things like how to access the Windows registry and things like that, and Kai's got a terrific set of utilities to do that, and I think most of them, if not all of them, are in Tatin at this point. And then I also wanted to thank you for developing and hosting Tatin, and finally for everything else that you've done for the APL community. So if we could just take a second and thank. So so far this year, we've had 150% growth. Okay, so PyPy is the Python package library. And Morton said yesterday that I told him it would take 14 years. Well, I hadn't taken into account the growth rate of the PyPy. So I took last year's growth rate compared to our growth rate and projected it out. So it's going to take us 17 years to catch up. So, well, if you plot it on a log scale, it looks a little less daunting. So it's anyhow. So we've got 3 new packages. The first one is NuGet, and it makes it easier to use .NET packages from APL. The second is APLProcess, which probably some of you have already used, but it's now available as a Tatin package, and it allows you to spawn a new APL interpreter in another process. And then finally, there's OpenAI, which is something that started out as a bit of a noodle for me, and it's proving to be kind of interesting. So NuGet, again, it's a tool to help you use packages, .NET packages from Dyalog APL, and they're available out in the NuGet library. And actually, NuGet has only got 418,000 packages, so we'll catch up to them a lot sooner than we will PyPy. And if you use Cider, which is the project management system that comes distributed with Dyalog 19, and Holden was using it for his project, and so you can add NuGet dependencies. There's a command in the Cider user command to add NuGet dependencies, and you give it the NuGet library you want, and it adds it, I guess. And so you can add them as dependencies in your APL project. So the steps to use NuGet in the session would be you define a directory where you want your NuGet package to live, and then you run NuGet.setup on that folder, on that directory, and it creates the infrastructure necessary to run the NuGet package. Then you say that you want to add to that directory the NuGet package and optionally the version number of the package. If you don't give it the version number, it will grab the latest one. And then this is when I went to I think it was Morton's workshop last year when he talked about NuGet. This made my life so much easier because I struggle with building correct quad using statements when I'm trying to use a DLL. And this does it for me. So I just pointed at that directly and I get a quad using statement that I can just assign to quad using, and life is wonderful. So then, in this case, we've now got a clock NuGet class, and it's got a single endpoint or function called UTC now, and it just works. So it's kind of cool. All right, let's talk about APLProcess. It's a cross-platform utility to start an APL interpreter in a new CPU process. So this means it will work on Linux, Unix, Mac, Windows. Now we found out, Kai reported a bug that it doesn't work with the load equals parameter, and we'll fix that after the user meeting. But the isolate workspace uses APLProcess. It fires off as many tasks as you have additional processors on your system, and it will distribute when you call a parallelizable or a parallel execution, it will distribute that execution to each one of the processes that's running a separate APL interpreter. So this, if you use quad new and you give it a workspace and any command line parameters, this will create an instance of APLProcess and start it up. And then you've got P is an object that has functions and information about how to manage that process. Now you can also use APLProcess.new, and it will return the object, but it won't start the process yet. So this gives you an opportunity to set some additional parameters if you want. For instance, I want to be able to ride into this particular process on port 22361. And then to start it up, you run p.run. So there's a sample, an RPC remote procedure call example in the samples folder in the APLProcess repository. And so here's the code basically stripped out of the piece of RPC that starts up an APLProcess. So we create a new process. We're going to assign it. We want it to load this workspace. And the workspace has a quad LX that detects whether it's running as a child process or not. And the way it does that is it looks for RPC port, right, which is the port that it's now going to communicate back to the parent process. And then we can say whether we want the child process to run in a separate thread. And this is sometimes useful if you want to ride into the child process. You can, if it's running in a separate thread, you can ride into the session and then see what's going on in the child process. You can say whether it's a runtime interpreter or not, right? And you can also, again, give it information about how to start up ride. You can just give it a port number and it will listen on that port. You can also set a full set of ride parameters, ride init parameters, to do other things like host the zero footprint ride. And then detach basically says, if I destroy the instance of the process in the workspace here, does the child process continue running or not? So for instance, if you wanted to, you could spawn off a bunch of child processes to do a bunch of work and then close your application. And then they would each go off and do their things and close. And again, once you have this, once you want to start the process, you basically just run the run method on the process instance, APLProcess instance, and it does it. Okay, so what could you use this for? Well, to distribute processing to other processors. I wrote a blog post several years ago where I've got the first project I used to teach myself the Dyalog GUI was a Mandelbrot set explorer. And I decided that when isolates came out, it would be interesting to be able to split up the image and calculate things using isolates. So that's what I did. I basically would fire up, it would see how many processors I had on my system, and then fire up an APL process on each one of those. You can offload processing. And sometimes you might want to spawn a lengthy process so that you're not tying up your main thread of an APL application. Another thing is you might want to spawn a risky process. We did this in the original try APL. We sent off statements to be executed in a child process so that if by some chance it caused a problem and got an error, it didn't stop the server, it just, the child process hung up and went away. And then soon you'll be able to run startup processes on other machines via SSH. So you can have really distributed processing in that case. So APL process is documented. It's out in GitHub. And so this is part of the MOOC docs. I'm not sure, we've talked a little bit about it. Morton's shown some screens of it. So this is the new, this is how we're basically going to be documenting tools from here on out. It's available online. You can actually print it. There's a little print command there if you're into paper. But all right, let's talk about OpenAI. First of all, it started as a noodle back around, I guess, February, when we were meeting for some Dyalog internal meetings. And in working with it, like I said, it's a little like trying to change the oil in a moving car, because OpenAI is continuously updating their endpoints and their versioning and so on. And by the time I had the version 1 of the assistance endpoint almost done, and they released version 2, which was better, but it's still not great. But anyhow, it's it's a little bit of a challenge, but I'm going to try and keep up as best I can. And so currently, a subset of the endpoints of the OpenAI API are implemented, and we'll get more, including the assistance endpoint, which Mark is eagerly waiting for, are coming in October. And one of the things, OpenAI makes heavy use of HttpCommand. And so this is actually a good model for how to use HttpCommand to talk to things like OpenAI. And so there are a lot of other LLMs, large language model companies out there that have published APIs. So while you may not want to use OpenAI specifically, this is a good usage pattern for how you can use HttpCommand to access those other LLMs. So again, there's documentation. It's not complete, but it's not too far from being complete. So let's talk about the endpoints. There's a models endpoint, which will return information. So OpenAI has a whole bunch of LLMs, and this will return information about the number of LLM, or the information about the LLMs that are available. There's this thing called endpoint called moderations, which will measure the harmful potential of a collection of text. There's audio, which does text-to-speech, it does transcription, it does translation. There's image, which you can create and modify images based on text prompts. And then there's chat, which is you can have a conversation with the OpenAI assistant. Models, okay, as I said, it returns information about the available OpenAI models. And this is basically all you do to call it. And it will return, because it uses HttpCommand, it returns the HttpCommand response namespace. And what that does is if there's some error in the request, for some reason, like you didn't provide your authentication key, you can look at the body of the response, and it will tell you what happened. You can also check the return code and the HTTP status, to make sure that the request succeeded or failed. But if it does succeed, then in the data portion of the response namespace, which in this case is M, data is our thing from HttpCommand. The lowercase data is part of the structure that OpenAI returns. And so there are 31 namespaces. We convert the JSON into APL using quad JSON. And so there are 31 different models available as of last night. And so you can see that here are the first 12. And different endpoints support different models. And you can go out to the OpenAI. In the comments, I list the models that are available to a particular endpoint at the time I wrote the comment. Now that may change. Again, we're moving a moving car trying to change the oil. And so you can always go out to the OpenAI documentation, the API documentation, and it will tell you for a given endpoint, these are the models that are applicable. Moderation is kind of interesting. It returns an evaluation of potentially harmful text. So demo time. We're going to try and switch virtual desktops and have a keyboard. Okay, so first of all, how's the font size? Is that okay? Can people see? Yes, in the back? Andy says good. Okay. So I'm basically just loading the OpenAI namespace. I'm initializing it, which copies in the latest copy of HttpCommand. And then there's a new feature in HttpCommand where I don't like to type API keys into the session. I'm just strange that way, right? So what you can do is you can specify that you can specify a delimiters, a beginning and ending delimiter, between which HttpCommand will substitute whatever is between the delimiters and the value of that environment variable as either a header name or a header value. So in this case, I'm setting the header substitution to %, and by default it's turned off, so you're not accidentally going to get environment variables injected into your headers if you don't want it. And then I'm setting the API key to I have my API keys loaded into in my APL configuration into an API keys subdirectory, and so I have an OpenAI API key here. So now, well, actually, I can sit and do this. So I can say m gets OpenAI.moderation, and let's give it some text. I want to embarrass Python users. And then if I say m.run, right, it's moderations.moderation. Moderation. Yeah, there's an endpoint that'll pick that up too. And I got OK, and then if I do m.show, let's see, okay, so that didn't flag. So it looks at these different categories: harassment, hate, sexual violence, harassment, threatening, and so on. And then it gives you a score for each of those. And if it exceeds some threshold, it'll make that as true. And then flagged basically says, are there any of these parameters that are true? And so it's okay to embarrass Python users. I want to mutilate Python users. This is going to look terrible when the video's published, isn't it? But anyhow, this is just an example. I really don't want to mutilate Python users. So now if we run m.show, it's flagged as true, and we can see that we got violence, we ticked on violence, and it's got a 95.7% score. So this could be potentially useful if you're developing documentation and you want to try and make it as neutral as possible. All right, wish me luck. Click. Yes! So there's an audio endpoint, and it has three functions, three methods. One is speech, and it turns text into audio. There's transcription, which turns audio into native text, and there's translation, which turns audio into English text. So the first one, translate some speech. So this is a paragraph from the OpenAI documentation, and I ran this as a test the other day, and so I said, okay, create a speech object with my text, and then I'm going to say, okay, the out file is going to be here, so it's going to write an MP3, I think, is the default extension, and then I run it, and I get something like that. And now, hello? Why is it? That was supposed to play.
OpenAI makes heavy use of HttpCommand version 5.6 or later. During initialization, OpenAI will look for HttpCommand in its parent namespace, and if it doesn't find HttpCommand, it will load it from your Dyalog installation and then upgrade to the latest version of HttpCommand. The endpoints implemented in OpenAI will initialize OpenAI if not already initialized. You can also initialize OpenAI by running openai.initialize. In a production environment, HttpCommand should be copied and saved into the workspace rather than relying on loading and upgrading.
What impressed me with this, first of all, the first time I ran it, it caught a typo in the text. And while it stumbles on HTTP command, the pacing and the inflection of the output was really impressive. So, you know, and basically when I write, I try and write like I would say something. And this, you know, when it plays back and I hear what I would have said, I think that's a good thing. So. Then there's transcription, which transcribes audio into native text. So I gave a number of my Dyalog compatriots this text and asked them to record a file in their native tongue. And so you basically give it an in file and an out file. So I have an input sound file, and then I'm going to have an output JSON file, as it turns out. And then you go ahead and run it. And so in Danish, this is how it was transcribed, and those of you who speak Danish can verify whether that's accurate or not. And then German is here, and finally Italian. Now the thing I was interested in the Italian is that it has an exclamation point. And so I'm not quite sure what inflection you used, Martina. Maybe you were really excited about this, but if you were, it picked up on it. No, that was great. So now we've also got translation, so we're going to transcribe the audio speech into English text. Again, the same phrase and same style of running, but now in Danish it says, "Welcome to Dyalog 24. We hope you have fun and learn something new." I mean, that's pretty, other than the spelling of Dyalog 24, it's exact. And then German inserted a "We hope you will have fun and learn something new." And then Italian, we've got the exclamation points again, and "we wish you to have fun." So it conveys the intent of the message, and if you run this multiple times, you'll get slight variations in the text you get back, which is kind of interesting.
Where does the spelling error in Dyalog?
Well, it here's Dyalog 24, right? And apparently Dyalog 24 isn't out there enough for it to recognize it as a term. Right, yeah, so the LLM has an as of date, and if it was, you know, a year ago, it probably wouldn't have Dyalog 24. OpenAI creates an image from a prompt. Edit allows you to edit an existing image, and Vary creates variations of an existing image. And now we're going to go back and do another demo real quick. And here I'm going to say I get OpenAI.image.create What kind of an image should we create? How about a Bouvier de Flandre juggling bananas? Okay. Okay, so if we run that, this is going to take a little bit. And it can either return the base64 encoded image or a URL to the image online. In this case, the default is URL. So I have a show function that, so it's okay, so I can say i.showPics, and there's my Bouvier juggling bananas. So, okay. Finally. So then there's chat, which is basically you can have a conversation with the OpenAI assistant, and we'll go right into the demo. So here I'm going to say chat gets OpenAI.chat.completion, and I'm going to tell what kind of an assistant it is. You are a sarcastic assistant, and how do I compute the average of a list of numbers in APL, question mark. And then we can say c.run, and we say let me turn boxing on. The conversations display better that way. c.conversation, conversation. Oh, that's simple. Just sprinkle some magic APL fairy dust on your list of numbers and voila! The average will appear before your very eyes. Just kidding. But it actually got average right, but I guess there's enough examples of average in APL that... It's not? Oh, yeah, right. No, actually it's right. That is right, it's just inefficient. So, happy number crunching. So let's see, we'll do one more. Oh, hang on, let's say c.user. So now the user is going to continue the conversation and say, tell me that in Italian. c.run, c.conversation. And I leave it to you to tell me how close that is. What's that? So anyhow, so that's into the future. Tatin-wise, we're going to continue to release Tatin packages as we identify good candidates. So we've got a lot of workspaces, we've got a lot of tools, and as we polish them up, document them, and so on, we'll release them as additional Tatin packages. And if you have priorities about things that you'd like us to deliver as Tatin packages, let us know, and we can move them up to the front of the list. And also, please, please, share your own utilities. I mean, part of what made Python and NuGet as popular as they are is they have a big community of people contributing to it. So we're a smaller community, but we can still contribute, right? And then into the future, OpenAI-wise, we're at version 0.1, so it's very much experimental. The user interface may change. And again, I'd like feedback on how easy or difficult it is to use. So please provide a feedback. We'll try and keep up as OpenAI continues to evolve. And thank you. Any questions?